How difficult is it to teach the Deming philosophy? What's the importance of values in the transformation, and what are the other problems? We have some taped comments first.
I think that the audience already believes they know what TQM and Deming means. They think it means process control, statistical process control, or process improvement. They think they've done it.
Could be team building, could be SPC. They may associate it with Deming, think it's Deming, but they haven't studied Deming's system of profound knowledge. Until you've done that, you haven't studied Deming. You may have studied a piece of it.
If you think about it, what transformation is about is changing our understanding of the world. That's what the system of profound knowledge is. It's saying this is a new understanding of the world that we work in. And if we change our understanding of the world that we're living in and working in, certainly that's going to change our rules for success, how it is we need to act and behave in that new understanding. And when the rules for success change, what becomes important to us will change. And that's what leads to a change in values.
Values are the basic principles and belief systems that we hold, the basic assumptions that we hold. And if they're those things, then out of our value system unfolds decisions, unfolds how we treat people, unfolds how we think about this whole thing.
When a group of people work together in an organization, they need to combine those values into what are called norms, the organizational norm. And the organizational norm has to be defined, and everyone needs to know what the organizational norm is. In the absence of such a definition, everyone will substitute their values. So the organization has to define what the primary value is, secondary and third, and that has been done.
I think that buzzwords are dangerous. I think that if you get into a conversation with someone who thinks that they know Deming, because it's a buzzword, and of course everybody knows what buzzwords mean, ask them if they've heard of the system of profound knowledge. Ask them if they've heard of systems thinking. Ask them if they understand what drives and motivates people, and do they have problems with the ways the organizations try to do this today, and involve them in a conversation about that.
To help us talk more about that, Linda Doherty and Ron Moen, both of whom you have met before, pardon me again, are on a panel with us. And they are being joined by Dr. Russell L. Ackoff, chairman of the Institute for Interactive Management, the author of 19 books, and professor emeritus of the Wharton School. Claire?
Before we get into this panel, I want to reply to somebody in the audience. Don Piper at Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, says it would be very helpful to have a 2-minute review of profound knowledge. Sort of an answer to my question a few minutes ago. Ron, could you do that for us, please?
2 minutes?
2 minutes.
I think it's something Dr. Deming has been working on all his life. He articulated it at the seminars probably in 1989. And it was a whole list for a while, and eventually it evolved into 4 parts, and that he then called a system of profound knowledge. One of the parts was theory of knowledge, which again was part of his seminars all along, and part of his learning all the way back to C.I. Lewis, theory of knowledge or epistemology. A second part is much of his lectures through the years on variation, understanding variation. A third part is on psychology, understanding people. And then a fourth part is on appreciation for a system. And it's those 4 parts and their interactions that create the system of profound knowledge. And the strength is really in putting the interactions together where you get your profound knowledge. Not in the parts, but understanding the interactions and putting those together.
Thank you very much.
That was less than 2 minutes,
that was
by
less
the way,
than 2
Ron.
minutes, actually.
Congratulations.
Maybe Dr. Ackoff will want to add to it, but I would like to also ask you a question about the values and getting profound knowledge taught. How do you get a conversation started when you're trying to help people change?
Well, the easiest conditions under which to convince any organization to change is when it's in a state of crisis, when its stability or survival is threatened. If it's desperate enough, it's willing to change in ways it would never otherwise consider. And therefore, one of the important techniques that are available is to show any organization, no matter how successful it is, that in its current future, there is a crisis impending. The way that's done is you assume that the organization will continue to do what it's doing now indefinitely into the future. And you assume the organization's environment will change, but only in ways that it expects. Now, if you project the future of the organization under those two conditions, you have a non-adaptive organization in a changing environment, and therefore will ultimately, through non-adaptation, destroy itself. What you don't know is how. The projection shows you how, and reveals the Achilles heel of the organization. Just to give you a quick example, in 1973, this was done for a very conservative organization, the 4th District of the Federal Reserve Bank. It was able to show that by 1985, the number of people required by the bank to clear checks would exceed the population of the United States. Now, that clearly could not happen, so the bank took steps, and it was then responsible, together with Atlanta branch, introducing electronic funds transfer system. So the technique of making an organization understand the crisis which is implicit in its current behavior is a very effective way of getting it to think of change.
Linda, how have you gotten people to think of change other than eliminating the Marine Corps or raising that specter?
I'm not sure that one can. When I talked about felt need and I talked about leadership, I think that it really does come from the leaders themselves. I have come over the years to understand that I cannot convince anyone that they ought to pay attention to Dr. Deming's principles and to learn and to carry them out. But that's the good news, because what that does is it frees me up to think about other ways that one can get to executives. I ask questions such as, how does an executive or a leader learn? How do they learn visually? Do they learn from their peers? Do they learn from examples? How can you get to them in that way? But I have come to see that the logic basis of Deming's principles very often have not worked for us. In government, it's even more difficult because, in fact, we are a bureaucratic organization and few bureaucratic organizations go away. We may downsize, we may reduce, but generally we are here for the long term, so no one believes we are truly in a crisis.
Ron?
One of the 4-day seminars was for CEOs. It was in St. Louis in 1991, and Dr. Deming started that seminar off. I think there were maybe 170 people, and it was the only time he said this that I know of. And he said to the CEOs, if you change yourselves, your companies will automatically be changed. And that set a tone for the entire 4 days. There was actually a 5th day on Saturday. And so I think it's very consistent with what Linda's saying, that it really starts with that individual. And if that individual is the CEO or leader of the organization, that is the starting point. Now, that doesn't make it automatic, but it's a starting point. And it really, I think, set the tone for that seminar.
I think it's dangerous to give the impression that change must start at the top. There have been major organizational transformations that have begun at the middle or at the bottom. For example, Eastman Kodak, a 6th-level manager, Henry Fendt, produced a major transformation in the corporation. It caught on this contagion and spread out, and eventually affected the appointment of a new CEO. At Alcoa, Tennessee, it started at the bottom and worked up. So I think it's dangerous to give this responsibility for change entirely to the leaders. It's also a responsibility of the followers.
Yeah, again, Dr. Deming said in Out of the Crisis, the whole movement could start at the middle, speaking with one voice, and build a critical mass. So it can work from other directions.
But I suspect it's easier if it comes from the top, isn't it? I mean, if you've got the top guy involved, wouldn't it be a little bit easier to get it done?
If the top is admired by the middle and the bottom.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, there's a point.
What role do organizational values and personal values play in a transformation of any kind of enterprise?
Well, there's a fundamental change that we're in the process of experiencing in the organizational values. Historically, organizations were originally looked at as machines which have been created by their God to do his work, much the way Newton looked at the universe. And when it did, the organization had no purpose of its own, but it had a function, which was to serve its God. Now, after World War I, we went through a transformation where we began to think of organizations as organisms, biological things. That's when the company became the corporation, a corpus or a body. And then it had an objective of its own, which is survival. The parts of the organization, the organs, have no purpose of their own, but they have to serve, in functional terms, the purpose of the whole. Now, what we've been going through is a conversion from looking at organizations as organisms to looking at them as a social system. And that involves a tremendous transformation of values, because the social system has three kinds of values it must serve. It must serve the values of its parts. They have purposes of their own. It must serve the purposes of the larger system that contains it and the other systems that are contained in that larger system. That's the social responsibility of the organization. And it has its own responsibilities. And those are development. Unfortunately, in our culture, the distinction between development and growth is not very clear. Let me just say a word about that. You can grow without developing, and you can develop without growing. The cemetery is a good example. It grows, but it doesn't develop. On the other hand, Einstein continued to develop long after he stopped growing. So we have to focus on development, which is an increase in capacity or capability, rather than an increase in size or number.
Linda?
One of the things that we have found is that organizations do have organizational values. The important thing is to make those explicit. Most of them are implicit, but it is critical to make them explicit, because come to believe that that's the basis upon which many significant decisions are made. It is on organizational values. If I could use the Marine Corps once again and their strategic plan. One of their organizational values says, we take care of each other. Now that's not unusual. Many organizations say that. They go on to say, we remove our wounded and dead from the battlefield. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's an appropriate metaphor for corporate America, but what it says, might be, but what it does say is, it says something very profound about the Marine Corps. It says something about who they are collectively, what they believe in, and many implications for how they train people, how they socialize people, how they bring them in, how they teach them how to perform as a unit. Big implications from that value.
I think the other thing is, if we look at the organization of the future, values are even more critical. It'll be the glue that holds an organization. It's more diverse in its workforce, more flexible workforce, lifetime employment may be out the window. And really a changing workforce from a mass production oriented to other kinds of higher technologies. That this new environment, values will be the only glue that can hold the organization together.
Russ?
I think we talk about values of an organization when you have to distinguish between what they preach and what they practice. Universities and colleges, for example, preach that their principal value and function is the education of students, and that's absolutely nonsense. You can't explain a university's behavior if you think it's about education of students. What it's about is providing the faculty with the quality of work life they want.
We're saying that here at this junior college.
Teaching is the price they got to pay, and like any price, you try to minimize it. A corporation says that its principal value is maximizing shareholder value. That's nonsense. If that were the case, executives wouldn't fly around in private jets and have Philippine mahogany-lined offices and the rest of it. The principal function of those executives is to provide themselves with the quality of work life that they like. And profit is simply a means which guarantees their ability to do it. Or you take a hospital. It proclaims that it's there to take care of patients. That's nonsense. It's there to provide the doctor with a place to practice medicine. And we're there to make their practice possible. And so on. So if we're going to talk about values, we've got to talk about what the values are in action, not in proclamation.
Mm-hmm. Ron?
No, I can't top that. I want to hear some more.
But I think that definitely is true, and we see that everywhere as well. And that's one of the reasons why one needs to make them explicit, so that you can begin to examine everything you do as an organization to see if in fact they are congruent with your values. And those places where it is not are very, very good places to start working on the organization as a system. If you are teaching people one thing and you are modeling as a leader a different behavior, why are you surprised when people behave very differently?